Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Always a pleasure to be learning together. This class again is part of Folzman here at Drisha. This is the second session of AI, Halakhic decision making, and Torah education with Rabbi Jonathan Ziring. Just a couple reminders. You'll receive an invitation to become a panelist if you are joining in right now. You'll receive it in a minute. Just accept it so that you can participate in class. You please stay on mute when you're not actively speaking. I'll also help mute you, and just feel free to unmute when you would like to speak again, just so we avoid having background noise. And then, of course, as always, you can also participate by writing in the chat. And I believe you could just speak up when you would like to talk. Just unmute and speak up. Correct, Rabbi Ziri?
Yeah, that's always fine.
Perfect. Okay, so with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Ziri.
Okay, thank you, Evie. It's good to see everyone again this week. Last week was really great. I was glad that everyone participated. We're going to try again like last week. I'm not going to pull the sources up on the screen so that it's easier for me to see everyone and have a conversation. So last week we talked about the ways in which artificial intelligence, generative AI, can be used in the context of education, and specifically how the fact that generative AI can shortcut many of the things that we do classically in terms of learning Torah and the like, forces us to ask, to really go back to first principles and ask, why is it that we learn Torah? What are the benefits? What are the goals? And to thereby be able to identify what is it that we could accomplish or could speed up without using these tools, and what things could we never replace. And we highlighted several different things. We talked about the goals of knowing Torah, in the knowing Torah being part of identity formation and community formation, in which case no tool that would outsource that information outside of us, that would, to use David's term, if we de-skilled ourselves from that memory, that ability to memorize it, that would be a fundamental loss. We talked about the experience of learning that can't be replaced in terms of the awe that it engenders, and simply just the obligation to learn Torah constantly, which obviously can never be replaced, no matter how easy it is to access information. What we're going to deal with the next 2 weeks, and this is something that has, I think, gotten a lot of has had a lot of conversation, at least amongst definitely amongst Halakhic authorities and amongst rabbis, but also not just amongst rabbis. I mean, that's the question of Halakhic decision making. Now, if you go online, you can see that there's a parallel phenomenon that exists in the Muslim world, modern Muslim.ai, I think, where they have basically a Muslim legal decision bot, which is it's entertaining. Some of it, right? It's well programmed. You can program it according to whether you want answers according to the Quran, according to the Hadith, whether you're Sunni or Shiite. But it also is programmed to know its limits. So if you ask it, I remember I sat with my students and asked it once, I am Jewish. Will I go to hell? And it said, I am an AI bot. I cannot decide who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. That's up to Allah. So it's programmed to know some of its limits. But the question really becomes, can you use something like that for halachic decision making? Now, again, similar questions are also raised outside the religious sphere. There have been several articles already published on the way AI can or cannot be incorporated in legal decision making in American law, and the extent to which there might be distinctions between district courts and appeals courts, between federal courts, where their job is to, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but is to really interpret the law rather than just to apply previous decisions. So this is really an important question: is to what extent can we, or can we not, turn to AI to be a halachic decision maker, a posek? And that's the question I want to deal with for the next 2 weeks. I've broadly divided the weeks into to two different topics, which we'll see as we go on. I won't give it away quite yet. But if I have to, I will draw on what I technically categorize as week 2 during week 1 as it becomes relevant. So I sent out both in one file. So this division between week 1 and week 2 is not set in stone. Okay, before we go into the sources, if I ask you, can a AI bot, can it be a posek? Can it be a halachic decision maker? What do we even need? What are we asking? How would we go about answering this question? What are your initial impressions, initial thoughts? What do you think? Okay, Noah.
So, what's it called? Opening thought is no, insofar as for it to be able to quote a halachic decision that was made previously, as we all know, AI is very good at that. It can scan a source and just regurgitate it. However, because inherently its decisions are based on values that it had been assigned, as opposed to when a Rav is making a halachic decision and they need to go and they might be feeling more like Hillel or Shammai. Am I making a decision that's more compassionate, or is it more stringent to the law? There's an element of human nuance that's missing, and I think that's why it can't. If that makes sense.
Okay, so Noah really said two things. Because Noah said no, but he said a qualified no. Because the first thing Noah said, and he's 100% right, is we need to define our terms. Right? We need to define our terms. Is that when I say, can it make a halachic decision? That means a lot of different things, because not all halachic decisions are created equal. There are certain quote unquote halachic decisions which maybe colloquially we would refer to as psak, but they're not really psak in the classic way. So, and this is, as I said, that I leave myself open to being allowed to pull from sources from next week. So if you turn actually all the way to the second to last source on next week's, but they're all in the same file here. So this is technically source 9 on week 2, but I'll read it quickly. Shulchan Aruch just says that lo mikri hora'a ela shemora al. First of all, psak, a halachic decision, is really only something that's real. A theoretical case doesn't count as psak. Okay, we'll leave that for now. Sivchet is really what Noah was getting at, which is lo mikri hora'a ela b'davar sheyesh bo chidush lashoel. Something is not a halachic decision unless it's new, it's novel. But everyone knows the answer. That's not considered a halachic. That's not a psak, right? If I ask the AI, what day does Hanukkah start? And it says the 25th of Kislev, which this year falls out on whenever it falls out, December, whatever, 24th, 25th, 24th, I think, right? AI is very good at that, but that's not a psak, right? That's nothing, right? That is telling me information that everybody knows. So that was a bad example because I wasn't sure about the English date, but I knew the Hebrew date. I knew it was Chafei Kislev. And then in Siftet, it says that Yesh mi shekadav shekola kotuv b'sfarim mi piskei geonim yachol rabbi meirabo. And some say that even something that's not obvious but is found in accepted sources, that's also not a psak. And as Noah notes correctly, AI is really good at that, right? It's really good at that. If you say, just tell me what to do on, how many candles do I light on the 5th night of Hanukkah, and give me a source, it can probably find you a source that says, on each night of Hanukkah, the ideal is to light the number of candles that reflect that night. and it probably is even capable of telling you, and if you don't have that, then you can light one candle. But this is not, and it can even give you the source and footnote it. Right? That is very good, but that's not a halachic decision. What Noah notes correctly is that a halachic decision, when we talk about a posek and psak, we talk about something that is not as clear cut. It's not as clear cut. And why it's not clear cut, that's already what we need to see. Right? So Noah brought up one thing is that it's not clear cut. So he used the word nuance, right? Now, nuance, so we can mean a lot of things by that, right? He said nuance, and he also said that you could have a more or less compassionate psak. Now, those are two different things. One is that there's sort of logical range of possibilities, right? And the second is that there's also in halacha the human component, right? Then in addition to the legal factor, there are other things that we have to look at, which come into psak. And the assumption is that some of these AI might be able to do, and some of them they might not be able to do. Okay, good. So we'd have to really identify those factors. What are the things? What are we looking for in a psak? And what is it that this, what is it that ChatGPT or whatever the equivalent is that we'll make, right? We'll make the posek bot, whatever, and again, having seen what they did in the Muslim world, I can imagine how you could do this, right? You could say, do I want this according to traditional Ashkenazi psak, according to Sephardi psak? Do I want it according to the Mishnah Berurah, the Aruch HaShulchan? Do I want it according to, you could probably get very fancy. Only give me responses that were written, before the writing of Shulchan Aruch, so that I can know the more classical sources, or only give me modern sources, right? You could do anything. Okay, good. Who else wants to win? I see Anne wants to win. Okay, go, Anne, all yours.
Well, generally, a psak for a person should be personal to that person, should take into account the individual circumstances and why the person is asking.
Okay, good. So the next thing that Anne notes is that psak is personalized, which means a few things, but at the very least, it means that the person answering, or whoever is answering, that's the question we're asking, whether AI can answer, and it's not a person. At least I'm assuming that for now. Can answer, maybe could spit back some information generally, but there are personal elements to it. Now, by personal elements, we mean different things, right? One is personal elements in terms of the halacha. There's personal elements in terms of pastoral issues. There's personal issues in terms of just how things should be said, right? There's a lot of elements that are personalized, and it's not clear that AI will be able to do that. Good. Okay. Noah. Not Noah. No, okay, not Noah Balcony. Noah. No, yeah. I'll distinguish that way for now.
Okay. I feel like my sense of what psak is, in order for an entity to actually make or give psak, there has to be an element or the potential for or presence of moral culpability. Like ChatGPT can't, get punished for well, in theory, but it's not a discrete entity that can go before a Beit Din and say, yes, I told Noah to do that, so I will take some amount of punishment for having given poor psak there.
Okay, right. So Noah adds something which I think is 100% right, which is part of issuing a halachic decision is that whoever is making the decision, there is a as the Gemara describes, at least in the context of Beit Din, is you feel like the yoke is on your shoulders, right? Like there is a responsibility. When someone asks me a halachic question, I feel a responsibility. I feel like if I get it wrong, then God will not be happy with me. I will have done something wrong to the Torah. I will have done something wrong to the person. And if I get it right, I take that very responsible. And I tell it's not just responsibility if I get it wrong. There's simply responsibility. I know that sometimes I'll tell people before I paskin for them. If they come to me with a question, I say, listen, one of the things that is happening now, especially on somewhat controversial issues, I'll tell them, listen, what is happening now is if you are asking me to paskin, just know what that means is I am willing to put myself out there for you. And if someone challenges you on that, right, and says, how could you do such a thing? How dare you do such a thing? Then you can give them my number, right? And you can hide behind me, right? I'm taking the responsibility to myself, right? That's part of what it is, right? There's also just that very really, forget being punished, right? Part of psak is if someone is entrusting me with the ability to guide them through a halachic question, then I take that risk very seriously. And part of it is that I protect them. Because I tell them, okay, let people get angry at me. That doesn't always work. Some people get angry at them anyways, but often that'll work, right? And yeah, right. ChatGPT can't really that can't happen, right? I mean, if it's wrong, like you tell ChatGPT you hallucinated, it'll say, "I'm sorry. How's this? Have I fixed it?" Right? Like there's no responsibility. It'll just, I mean, this is a fascinating question. Just parenthetically, there's been a lot of discussion about, not in the case of psak, but more in financial issues. Should laws be set up that actually would recognize artificial intelligence as having an independent entity, similar to like a corporation, where you could penalize it, right? The same way that you could sue a corporation, even though it's not real, it's a legal fiction. Should we do the same by AI? Because what would happen if, AI did the equivalent of, I don't know, insider trading or something like that, right? Now, right, could you penalize the assets that it accumulated? Whatever that would look like. And there is actually a lot of discussion amongst both legal theorists and also amongst tech people in the tech world, whether that's maybe a better way to go. As we sort of structure what the future will look like. David, I see your hand in the corner.
Yeah. So I would be very concerned about having it actually make decisions, but that's not the only role for it. And I don't know if we're going to be talking about other ways it could be used, because especially if it were trained on Jewish sources, or if Jewish sources were given more weight in the model, then I'm pretty sure that right now it could answer a question which we don't care about, like how many candles on the fifth night. They're probably going to get that right, and that's probably right now it could do that. I say without having tested it, but it's the type of question it's really good at. We're more interested in more complex questions, obviously, and there I think that it can be extremely helpful in being an advocate, being a researcher, or looking for holes in here's what the human says, here's what I think is the right position to take, and ask it to comment on that from a Jewish sources, and it will do that. I mean, it does that in other contexts. I know it does it in Western philosophy. It's really, really good at that. And if you ask it a general question and you say, I'd like to know what are the important threads in this, it will do a really good job of assembling them. And if you ask it, to compare two of them or how they intersect, it'll respond in really sensible ways. Now, you can disagree with it because it's not making the decision, but it seems to me that's a really, really powerful tool.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you. I definitely agree with David that it can be an excellent research tool, and it is. And in fact, just to illustrate some of the things it can do, I thought this was right considering the course, was that anything that didn't have an easy online translation, I'm not sure if it was true this week or maybe next week, I just put the translation from ChatGPT, just so you can see how good it is. It's just sort of basic things. I can take complicated text and translate it in a few seconds. I thought it, the illustrative, to illustrate some of its power was the right thing to do on these source sheets. I agree with you 100%, right? It can do really good things. It can, this is, it can, it's actually quite good when you give it something and say, here's an essay, give me a, summarize the essay for me. That's really good. And, sure, maybe you'll reread the essay or skim the essay to make sure it got it right. But often it will. And if nothing else, right, it gave you tools, or summarize the sources that are out there. That it's very good at. And that comes back to Noah's question, which is at the beginning, which is, well, what are we really talking about when we say psak, right? There's a lot of different things that it means by psak, and sure, research and providing information for people, that it's very good at, and we should utilize it no less than we should use everything else that we have, whether it be the internet in general, or it be all the search engines that we have, the Responsive project, whether it be Hebrew books and Otzar Chachma, and all the things I have in my computer that I use all the time that give me access to hundreds of thousands of books. And I agree with that 100%.
Can I just clarify something? I'm sorry, I'll just take a second. So absolutely, fantastic at summarizing, but you can also ask it to, whether it's done the summary or not, you can say, okay, but how does that fit? What would so-and-so say about this? How does it fit with what this person said about it? Is there any middle ground? You can have it debate, and it is
I agree with you 100%. A few years ago, someone actually asked me, this was, they were trying to develop, this specifically to, how could we train an AI to think like Ramosha Feinstein or something like that? Like, how could you go through, a posek tshuva and basically, feed it all in and say, okay, you've gotten a sense of the, 1,000 tshuva that they've written. Can you tell me what they would say in this question? Now, obviously, it's not going to be 100%, but it's quite provocative, right? It'll say, look, these are the types of factors that he invokes. And I agree with you that it's not just that it gathers information. It can actually get human beings to think in ways that they couldn't have. And you can also give it and say, listen, here's an argument. Is there an obvious flaw? And sometimes it can do that. And that's all really, really powerful and should be used. So all of that, I think, is definitely true. And that's why, to me, it's very important to really define our question, right? Because it means so many things, right? Because again, certain people will say, of course it can paskin, it can tell you what day, how many candles you light in the 5th night of Hanukkah. But that's because that's not what I mean by psak, right? And it can get you to think clearer, and it can help you sharpen your own ideas. Okay, that's also important, but that's also not necessarily psak. I mean, the same way where, let's say I, someone asks me a halakhic question, and I go to consult with other people, right? In the end of the day, like, I could say, listen, I'm not making a decision. Ask someone, that's above my pay grade. But sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll consult with my teachers, but I'll make the final decision, right? And then I'll, when I tell a person, I'll say, listen, I consulted with these people. They said these things. This is my feeling. You came to me. You trust me. This is my, this is how I feel about it. And I'm putting myself behind that answer. And obviously, there were other people that helped me think about it, but that's not the decision, right? That's not what psak is. Okay, and that's why, again, this is such a complicated issue, because the terms that are used are often thrown around in ways that are really not clear. And part of, I think, what we need to do in the next 2 weeks is define our terms. And again, I don't think we'll exhaust this. This is really a massive topic. But what I want to do is at least define the terms enough to put out certain basic claims that I think are important. Okay. Anyone else want to jump in, or should we're like 25 minutes in, so we can start the sources and at least get some. Okay, we can always jump in. People can always message me or call out. And I saw Noah asked about whether we could do this for philosophical questions, and whether that would be different. And I think many of the things we'll talk about would overlap, some not, because philosophical questions are different in certain ways. Okay. The first source I gave you is simply just a summary of the fact that it's not just psak that we need to define. We obviously need to define AI, because there are different types of AIs. There's rule-based AI, and there's machine learning based AI. They're not actually identical, and they are different. So I gave you here just a basic summary that the advantages of rule-based AI is simplicity and cost efficiency. Rule-based AI is not very resource intensive to develop, since it does not require extensive data collection, cleaning, or training. Human experts can define business roles based on existing knowledge, reducing implementation and complexity. Transparency and explainability. Rule-based AI offers high transparency as its decision-making process relies on explicit if-then predefined rules. This transparency allows business leaders to easily understand and interpret the system's decisions, fostering trust and facilitating compliance, right? So rule-based AI, I think we all understand, is not doing real PSOC, but it could be really, really effective at the basic questions, right? Like if I set up the rule, which is, just scan Shulchan Aruch and answer the question, as I said, as it says in Shulchan Aruch, by spitting back the line in Shulchan Aruch, right? We all understand that AI could do that really well, right? Really, really well. It's, very specific, but that's not PSOC. And that comes to the second point here, which is disadvantages and limitations of rule-based AI. Is one, lack of adaptability, right? And this is something that several people had made the point that PSOC has to be adaptable, and rule-based AI is not good at that. Rule-based AI systems are inherently static and inflexible. They can only adapt to changes or evolving conditions with manual adjustments to the predefined rules, which means the process is not scalable. Now, obviously, therefore, for the purpose of PSOC, what we're asking is not whether rule-based AI can paskin, it's whether machine learning, which is more flexible, will ever be able to have that adaptable capability. The second one, which is also very important, is that rule-based AI has difficulty with ambiguity. Now, that's also true of machine-based learning, that rule-based systems may struggle when faced with ambiguous or uncertain situations, when predefined rules do not offer clear guidance. Machine learning is better at it, but again, notoriously, it can hallucinate, and it can misunderstand, and riddled with bias, right? Now, this is the alignment problem, right? The alignment problem, and if you want to read a book which is excellent on this, there's an excellent book called The Alignment Problem on this by Brian Christensen, I think. Either way, the book is definitely The Alignment Problem. It's excellent. It also, at least last year, you could get it for free because it was one of the books that like the Effective Altruist group had decided was worth reading, and therefore they had for a while that if you just filled out a form on their website and you said, I want this book, they would send you for free because they believed that it would make the world a better place if people read that book. And that was one of the books that you could get. So I got it that way. It's quite good. And then, right, so this article here just notes that why machine learning AI is a better approach to decision-making, again, because it's flexible in ways that rule-based is not. But again, I think that highlights the issue, right? We're not talking about rule-based AI. Rule-based AI, for what you're using it for, that's not really PSOC, and that's fine, right? The question is really whether machine learning AI, which has more flexibility and can deal with ambiguity better, can that paskin? Okay, now more or less what I want to do is the following. This week, I want to give you my metaphysical reason why it can't. And next week, I'm going to deal with more pragmatic reasons why it can't. I think they're both important. But the reason I'm doing this is because I think what I'm going to say today, and this is an incorporation of what several of you have said, is why I think that no matter how good it gets, there are certain things that will never be true about it at a very fundamental level. And that's what I want to explore this week, okay? So the first thing I want to note is the following. I think the right off the bat, the biggest problem that it's going to face is that we assume, right? One of the questions we always ask about AI is getting the answer right. But to ask that question about PSOC, you need to ask, is there a right? And that's not obvious. There may not be a right. And I gave you a few examples. So in number 2, this is the introduction to Muhammad Hashem of Ramban, right? Nachmanides writes a commentary on Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, Rabbi Yitzchak Fez, his halachot, the Rif, and he defends him from the critiques that were raised by the Balamor, by Rabbi Zerachia Halevi, living in Provence. And the Ramban says, well, don't think that every time I defend the Rif, it's because I actually think the Rif is right. I don't necessarily, but I defend him anyways. And you'll tell me, how can I defend someone who I don't think is right? And he says, because law is not math. Math, 2 + 2, there's one right answer. But law is about plausibilities and probabilities and not certainties. And therefore, I might think on balance that the Rif is not right, but still think it's defensible, right? There's a difference between thinking it's impossible and thinking it's not the one I would have chosen. Because law is just not a discipline that lends itself to certainty to begin with, right? So he writes, when you look at my book, don't say Kichol Chuvatai al Rav Rabbi Zerachia Zal Kulan Be'enai Shuvot Nitzachot Machricho. Don't think that everything all my critiques of Zerachia Alevi are decisive. It's not true. And then you'll be so happy that, oh, you were able to raise a question about one of my points. Of course you can, because I wasn't trying to say something that's absolutely right. I was doing my best, but I understand that law, is about probabilities. So I'm explaining it, but it could be explained else in a different way. Don't try to get into the details to negate what I said. That's wrong. Anyone who's ever learned Talmud knows. In any proof, it's not 100-0. It's not absolute. Most things don't have totally knockout questions that negate a position 100%. It doesn't have answers like math and the like. It just isn't, right? That's not what law is. If you look at number 3, I gave you recently Rabbi Dr. Itamar Rosenzweig published his dissertation on Ramban. He has a very nice summary of what the Ramban is saying in number 3, and he writes, the difference between mathematical proof and weaker forms of argument were well known since Aristotle. It would be surprising if there were Talmudists in Ramban's day who believed Talmudic proofs could achieve the certainty of Euclid's geometry. Isidore Tursky, in his introduction to the Code of Maimonides, writes that Ramban's statement that Talmud study is not for the most part based on final proofs and absolute questions is implicit in Maimonides as well. Indeed, Tursky correctly states this idea articulated by Ramban is a basic attitude or modus operandi which conditions so much of Talmudic study and militates strongly and irresistibly against absolute finality, the admissibility of 2 or more equally tenable interpretations of uniform text and therefore of divergent conclusions, right? Like this is what Talmud is, right? We know this is what it is. More than that, right? There are several sources that imply that there are simply multiple truths in heaven, right? In heaven. I gave you a few. I didn't actually put the Bavli in Eruvin Yud Gimel, which is Elu Be'elu Devarim Chaim, but I put the Ritva there, so we'll get to it in just a second. But just give you a few examples. Yerushalmi and Sanhedrin, in number 4, says as follows: Ilu nidna haTorah chatucha. If the Torah had been given, decided, lo haita l'regel amida, no foot could stand. Ma ta'ama, right? Why wasn't the Torah given like the Rambam? Right? Rule after rule after rule after rule, because the Torah would not be able to survive. He said, tell me the halacha. Amar lo. Acharei rabim lato. The halacha is follow the majority. Rabu mizakin v'chulei. If there's more people who say he's innocent, so he's innocent. Rabu machayvin chivu. If most people say he's guilty, he's guilty. Kidei shetei haTorah nidreshet memtet panim tamei. Memtet panim tahor. So the Torah can be interpreted in 49 ways, in that it's pure, and 49 ways that it's impure. Minyan v'diglo, the gematria of the word v'diglo. V'cheinu omer amarot Hashem amarot tahorot kesef saruf v'lil aretz mizukot shivatayim v'omer meisharim ayevuch. And it says God's eternal, the commands of the eternal are pure sayings, molten silver in an earthenware crucible, refined 7-fold. Right. So the Torah inherently has, and if you take this at its face value, it means that the Torah, it's not that it's hard to know the right answer, is that there actually isn't one answer. There are multiple answers, metaphysically speaking, like in heaven. Noah sent something in the chat, but I thought only humanity with Jews, to be even more specific, those who have received. No. Good, okay, well, I'm going to get to that point. Hold that thought now. We're getting there. Similarly, Masechet Sofrim, In number 5, Amar Tanchum Bar Chanila, Ilu Nidna Torah Chatucha Lo Ita Omedet Raglaim Lamoresh Yoresh, Im Tamei Yish Mitamin V'Chayotze Bo, Im Dar Yish Mitamin V'Chayotze Bo. If the Torah had been clear cut, no judge would have a locus standing and laying down a ruling. But now he can, right? He can paskin like if he says pure, he has someone to rely on. If he says impure, he has someone to rely on. And then if you skip down, it adds a line. Rabbi Avo b'shem Rabbi Yochanan Talmid Vatik Ayel Rabbi Kiva Yodel Lidrosh Torah b'mem tet panim tamei umem tan panim tahor. There was a student who knew how to tell you the 49 explanations that it was good and 49 that it was bad. Shalom me'otadam shemkein rabu metamin tamu rabu metarin tahor kol minayin el sheyachacham b'mikra u'bakiv b'mishnah vatik b'talmud v'savur agada. Right, because he was such an expert. But again, it celebrates the fact there are actually different possibilities. The probably best known of the passages in the Talmud that says this, and again, I didn't give all the sources like this, but that's the Gemara in Eruvin Daf Yud Gimel, which is Elu va'elu divrei Elokim Chayim. Right, that the Gemara says that there was a dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and even though we eventually rule like Beit Hillel, we say both of these are the words. Well, either Elu Elu Divrei Elokim Chayim, both of these are the living words of God, or the words of the living God. There's a difference between those, but it's not clear what the proper translation is. Now there are different interpretations of that passage. Some say that means there really is one answer in heaven, but even wrong answers help clarify the truth. Right, that's one position. There are others who say, like Moshe Feinstein, that there's one truth in heaven, but we're not actually bound by the truth in heaven. We're bound by human truth, right? By going through the process, and sometimes there'll be a divergence between truth, and human truth, but human beings are actually bound by human truth and not divine truth, which is a striking statement. But some, like the Ritva in number 6, say no. What that statement means is that, metaphysically speaking, in heaven, God has like a Torah with multiple possibilities. This might be permitted, this might be forbidden. Right, so the Ritva says in 6, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God. Sha'alu Rabbeinu Tzarfat Zal. So the French rabbis asked, how could they both be the words of God if one says forbidden and one says permitted? V'tertzu, and they answered, Kisha'ala Moshe l'marom. When Moshe went up to heaven, the Kabel Torah, to get the Torah from God, Herulo al kol davar v'davar memtet panim li'isur, memtet panim leheter. God showed him the 49 ways to permit and the 49 ways to forbid. V'sha'al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he asked God, how could this be? V'amar sheheze masur l'chachmei Yisrael shebachol dor vador. Said, yeah, the Torah is given over to these scholars in each generation, and you rule like them. So the Ritva introduces this idea that there actually is, right, that there isn't one answer. There just isn't one answer. That's not how the Torah works. That there are multiple possibilities, and we are not trying to find the one and only answer. Right? We're not trying to find the one and only answer. You can see that there's a similar view here in the Amshel Shlomo, but I'll skip that for now. Now, if you skip to 8, Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig, in an article he wrote in 1989, Personal Initiative and Creativity in Avodat Hashem, notes that obviously saying there are multiple truths doesn't necessarily mean that all truths are equal. There can be better truths and worse truths, which sounds somewhat contradictory, but once you're talking about multiple truths in heaven, then that's plausible. And this is really the view of Maharal. Maharal is not always the easiest person to read, so I gave you Rav Rosenzweig's summary of Maharal. He says, the Maharal argues that while there may be multiple truths, all truths are not equal. Life is complex, and everything created does obtain of more than one combination of different components. So, for example, it is possible for an object to possess a sense of tumah, but its sense of tara overwhelms the tumah. The case of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, he argues, is one of those rare occurrences where absolute equality does apply, where the essences of both opinions appear to be of equal strength. But in most situations, while Psak Halakha doesn't deny the Shitat Yachid, right, the single opinion, and considers that it may be possible to rehabilitate it in a different context, there clearly is a decisive determination, right? So the Maharal takes a somewhat attenuated view that there are some halachic decisions where there's absolute equality between the two answers, but sometimes it's like 70% of truth is with one side, 30% of truth is the other side, and then there's a right answer, even though the other answer has a sense in which it partakes of truth. Okay. Now, why is this important? Because if you believe that there is only one truth, there's only one halachic truth, so then presumably the act of psak is trying to get at that one truth. If you don't believe that there's only one possible truth, right, you think that in heaven there are multiple possibilities, that God is actually totally okay with this object being permitted or being forbidden, right? That he like programmed into it different possibilities. So then you need to ask, well, then what exactly is the halachic process trying to do? And what is psak? Like, what is halachic decision making if there are different possibilities? So here's where I'm going to set out a thesis, and we'll see how it plays into to AI. Okay. So the first thing to note is that Ray Rosenzweig notes in his article on Elu Velu Divrei Elokim Chayim in number 9 the following. First, I'll give you a basic summary outside, and then we'll maybe read a few lines of it inside. And he says as follows: at first glance, you might think that if there is only one halachic decision, like in truth, in heaven, then there is less room for a multiplicity of practical answers. But if you think that there are multiple possibilities in heaven, then there's more practical answers. But Rosenzweig notes that that's not necessarily the case, because even if there is one truth in heaven, if you aren't sure you accessed it, then you might still have multiple practical possibilities, right? That's Rav Moshe Feinstein. There's only one truth in heaven, but human beings can't necessarily access it. And therefore, psak, you do your best to approximate what it is in heaven, but you might get it wrong, right? The same way that if God forbid someone goes in for, has a serious medical issue, and they go in for a procedure that's dangerous. Now, there is only one answer in the end of the day, right? If the doctor says, listen, statistically, if you don't get the procedure, you have a 50% chance of surviving. And if you do the procedure, so then you have a 75% chance of surviving for, another 25 years. But there's a 25% chance that you'll die on the table, on the operating table. There is only one answer as to whether that person will die, right? Either they will or they won't, right? Like, it's a factual question at the end of the day. He's giving you the statistics, but there are different practical answers of what you should do, taking into account that you don't actually know what the truth is, right? Just because there is a factual answer doesn't mean that you know what the practical answer is. On the flip side, Rosenzweig notes that if you think there are multiple truths in heaven, then that doesn't mean that there are multiple practical possibilities, because it could be that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel were both right in theory. But once unanimously the rabbis said we're going to follow Beit Hillel, the process of psak makes Beit Shammai a dead option and Beit Hillel the only option, right? So theoretical pluralism in heaven doesn't necessarily translate to practical pluralism, and sometimes it flips, right? Sometimes it flips. Right, so he writes, whatever position one adopts on the value of debate to theoretical study, there clearly is an obligation to arrive at one practical solution based on the sincere conviction of its accuracy. The relationship of psak as an enterprise dedicated to the goal of a single, uniformly binding conclusion, and the ambitious formulations of the theory of halakhic pluralism is complex and even double-edged. If one advances the position that there is only one authentic, or at least preferred halakhic truth, then the stakes of psak are high indeed. Halakhic decision becomes a hit or miss exercise in which the dissenting view stands in clear opposition to truth. If one has faith in the process which aspires to produce that truth, one cannot consider dissenting opinions as legitimate fallback positions to be possibly rehabilitated or relied upon, even upon extraordinary circumstances. To do so would be tantamount to expressing a serious lack of faith in the effectiveness of the decision-reaching process. At the same time, if one advocates the objective validity of alternate psakim, then even as they are more palatable as Dvar Hashem, they are ironically perhaps less legally significant as practical alternatives once they have been rejected by the process of psak. For under these circumstances, the formal and procedural aspects of halakhic resolution dominates. Psak, according to this view, need not concern itself with the risky, uncertain, and fallible task of revealing the one authentic truth, but instead focuses on establishing the best truth, consistent with its own principles of resolution. In this sense, the conclusions reached are absolutely binding in the realm of normative conduct, inasmuch as this view establishes psak as a din vadai, an absolute surety. This aspect of the relationship between psak and the theoretical value of alternative perspectives has been largely ignored by those who perceive of elu va'elu in strictly modern liberal terms, ignoring the concomitant ascendancy of pure formal procedure in these schemes. Okay. Which leads me to the next point, which is, this is like psak theoretically, but much more focused. When someone goes and asks a halakhic question, why do they have to listen to the answer they got? And if so, why? So there are three basic theories. If you look at number 10, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says as follows: Tanu Rabbanan, hanishal lechacham v'timei, lo yishal lechacham v'taher. If you asked a sage and he declared it impure, you should not ask another sage and make it pure. Lechacham v'asar. If you ask the sage and he forbade it, lo yishal lechacham v'yatir. Don't ask another sage to permit it. If there's a dispute, so then it goes on to say, if it's a biblical law, you follow the stringent position. If it's a rabbinic law, you follow the lenient position. But there is this basic notion that when someone asks a halachic question, they shouldn't then shop around for a different answer. But why not? So there are three basic theses. The first is, Rashi articulates in number 11, Mishum Kvodo de Rav Yehuda, because it's not respectful, right? You went to someone, you asked them to invest the time, to research the topic, to think about it, to work with you, to understand your situation. If you then say, thank you for spending the last 3 days, researching, consulting, and the like, but I'm going to ask someone else, that is just disrespectful, right? That's not, you asked someone a question. They invested their intellect, their emotions in the question. So it's just not respectful. That's theory one. Theory two is the reason that halakhic decision-making is binding is because by asking the question, the person asking has implicitly bound themselves to the answer. It's a type of a vow, essentially, right? That by asking someone, should I do this? Can I do this? What you're implicitly saying is, I accept to follow what you say. It's personal commitment. And that, if you look in the Nimukei Yosef in number 12, Kevan sheshal mimenu tchila, gamar b'libo lasot kechol asher yoreoto. Since he asked him first, he decided in his heart to do all that he ruled for him. The Ravid goes even farther, and the Ravid is quoted by Meiri in number 13 as saying that even if the halakhic decision-making Someone just said, is that the specific context? I think that was what I just saw in the chat. Yes, I should make that clear that it's only for this question, right? It's very clear in Psak that you are only bound to follow the answer that you got for the question you asked, right? So if the same question comes up tomorrow, but you didn't ask about it, right? You said, I want to know what to do now, right? So for example, you have your person that you talk to, right? You have your halakhic authority that you trust. But what can you do? You're on vacation and it's Shabbat, and the only person around is the local, whatever, the local Chabad rabbi in the shul. So you ask them for today because that's who's around. You're not bound once you get home. Like once you get home and you want to talk to the person that you trust and you always ask your questions to, that's totally fine. But the Meiri quotes the Ravid as saying, yeah, it's so much about personal commitment that even if the halakhic authority would then change his or her mind, you would be bound to the original answer because that's what you committed to. That was it, which is quite radical. That's theory 2. Theory 3, though, is much more radical. And that seems to be the position of the Ritva. And the Ritva says as follows. The Ritva says, I'll just try to get the key line. And he says, the reason is the keva, the 3 lines in, the keva de kama chacham, v'ra'ui lahora, kishahore aleh la'asor l'tuma shavye chaticha de isra. Because the first person that was asked is worthy of making halakhic decision making, worthy of making halakhic decisions, when the ruling is issued, it transforms the object into something forbidden. Now, what does that mean? So some people, and I've been having a back and forth with Rabbi Clapper about this for a while, and I told him that one of my nafkamina today is AI. So, Deborah, you can tell Rabbi Clapper that I discussed it here. One theory is the Ritva means the same as the Ravid, right? That the reason that the posek can make something forbidden is because thank you, Deborah. He liked this nafkamina. He thought it was cool. So I will now say the cool nafkamina. The Ritva could be the same as Ravid, which is you committed to it, and that's why it's as if it made the object forbidden. But Rav Shaul Yisraeli has a much, much more radical claim within Ritva. And Rav Shaul Yisraeli says as follows. Remember that Ritva was the person who endorsed the theory that there are multiple truths in heaven. So now the Ritva has a problem. If there are multiple truths in heaven, then what does Psak do? So Rav Shaul Yisraeli says, aha, the Ritva doesn't say Shavi Anafshe Chaticha D'Isura, that the questioner made it forbidden. What he says is that the posek has some metaphysical power to make it usur. Now, how can he do such a thing? He says, well, the Ritva thinks that there are multiple truths in heaven. But remember what the next line is. It's given over to the authorities in every generation to rule. Meaning, what is the act of Psak? The act of Psak is binding you to one metaphysical possibility, right? It's saying there were theoretical possibilities out there, but by asking the question and answering it, you become bound to a certain path. At least for now, at least in answer to this question. Now, Rabbi Yisraeli himself believes that this is only if he ruled strictly. But you can't create a metaphysical status of permitted. But Rabbi Yehuda Herzl Henkin notes that the Ritva doesn't believe that. The Ritva himself, and I bolded it on towards the end, he says, Elavadai Kidamran, the Kol Heicha Devi Shkulin, wherever the 2 people weighing in on the decision are of equal authority, the Nechlaku Ka'achat, and they argue, Lo Chal Isur Gota Chaticha. The status of prohibition doesn't descend on the object. V'rashai hamekil leharot lacherim kula bota chaticha. And therefore, the person who got the lenient ruling has the right to continue acting as if it's permitted, even if other people try to forbid it. And Rav Henkin says, yeah, because the Ritva believes that there is even like a metaphysical status of permittedness. That because what you've done is you've created a path, right? A metaphysical path. You've taken one of those 49 possibilities of permissibility, and by going through the process and trying to understand the Torah to the best of your ability and weighing in, so you have imbued this situation with your stamp of approval, and you have channeled that permissibility, wherever it is in heaven, don't ask me where it is, into this situation. Now, I know that's a somewhat radical thesis, but my short claim is like this. If you buy something like this, that psak, there isn't a right answer. There isn't a right answer. What makes it the right answer, like not practically, but really what makes it the right answer is that you went through the process of psak. And that changes the religious, metaphysical situation you're in, right? That narrows down the practical truth for you. That power, I'm going to guess, and this was something that Noah got mentioned before, I'm going to guess that power can only be vested in beings who are responsible for the Torah. If you look, for example, I gave you an 18 that the Sar Mikutzi in the Smak, in the Sefer Mitzvot Katan, says that there is a Halakhic obligation to issue Halakhic rulings, that those who are capable of weighing in on Halakhic rulings are obligated to. And I would suggest what I think is not a crazy thesis, which is that the power to paskin can only be given over to those who are obligated to engage in Torah and make decisions. And if you don't think that there is one answer, then what makes something true, or what makes it binding, or makes it real, is that the people who are responsible for the Torah put themselves on the line, lived up to their obligation, engaged in that process, and otherwise it doesn't work. Now, Deborah asked, is that only men or only adults? So the answer to the first one is no, right? The Sefer HaChinuch explicitly says that and I tend to think this is right, that both men and women who are capable of paskening have the obligation, right? That's what the Chinuch writes, and therefore he says that a woman who's capable of paskening is not allowed to, is under the prohibition of paskening while inebriated. So it's clear from him that both men and women can pasken, and apparently when men and women can both be drunk, and therefore have to be told don't pasken when you're drunk. Kids, it's an interesting question. I assume that kids can't, because they're not obligated fundamentally in the Torah at all yet. So my guess is that kids cannot, but I don't actually offhand have a proof for that. So my guess is kids can't paskin in a binding way. But I told the Ray Clapper that I'm very sold on this metaphysical approach. And one of the things I think it does is it limits psak to beings that are obligated, that are given the onus of responsibility by the Torah to be engaged in this process. Okay, I'm going to bracket 19, 20 to 21. I'll tell you the 10-second version, but we can actually read it next week, because I said there'll be a little bit of flexibility. There are several sources that imply that human beings who engage in the process of psak are also granted certain divine assistance. And I'm not sure that ChatGPT is granted divine assistance in the same way. I'm not sure, but because it's already 9:30, I'll leave that till next week. But again, just to summarize sort of my basic claim for this week, is that if, as Noah Noah pointed out, and Ann pointed out, and David pointed out in different ways. If halacha fundamentally doesn't have one answer, which means that the process of psak is not trying to figure out the one and only answer, but it's engaging in the word of God, in the way that God wanted us to do it, to come to decisions as the best way we can. And it's that process of engaging human beings in the word of God, in the way that we're supposed to, that creates the reality we're supposed to live in. Then the only beings that can do that, can actually answer a question which is meaningful, are those who have those responsibilities, for whom the Torah is real, for whom the Torah binds them. To making a irresponsible decision is against their obligation of treating the Torah with utmost of care and recognizing the sanctity and of the word of God. ChatGPT, right? If it hallucinates the wrong answer, it says, "I'm sorry," right? Whoa, it's not obligated to engage in Talmud Torah. It can't really engage in Talmud Torah. It has no mitzvah to learn Torah, and it has no sin if it tells you to do something which is obviously wrong. But without that responsibility, without that engagement with the word of God at the highest level, it can't do this thing called psak. And again, I know this is a somewhat strong thesis, maybe even controversial thesis, but I'm at least personally sort of sold on it, which is that psak is something transformative, right? It takes theoretical possibilities and by engaging in the process makes them real. Like not just like actually does something, makes them real. And if that's the case, then I just don't see how anybody except someone obligated in mitzvot, for whom it really is real and for whom it matters, can do that. So that's my thesis for this week. Next week, like I said, I'll finish off this source sheet, which adds the divine inspirations part to it, which I think is interesting. But we'll talk about some other models next week on other aspects, some of the things that Anne mentioned, the human component, which we didn't get into this week, in its various forms, that we're going to see next week. But this is at least my first thesis as to why I think that no matter how good it gets, it can't poskin, because I just think that poskening is something magical almost, right? It's something, I don't know, it's something spiritual. It's something that is the product of engaging in the act of divine command, of engaging with God's word in a way that only human beings who are obligated in that Torah can. Okay, that's my thesis for this week. I'll take any questions, comments on this, but again, remember that we're doing this over 2 weeks and that some of the points that you raise now will just have to be next week. And that's why, like I said, that's why I gave all the sources from day one, so we would have it here so we could draw on it as we wanted. Okay, I saw that Noah raised her hand.
No, I
know
was
there are
just
two Noahs.
clapping.
I know this is confusing. Okay. Yeah, Noah.
No, I was just clapping. Thank you.
Oh, okay. That was the clapping thing and not the hand raise. Got it. Okay. I have, when I see a hand, I assume it's raised. But okay, David.
I would clap too. But actually, I have a question and then a quick point. I'll do the quick point first because it's pretty relevant, which is you're talking about your metaphysics in which possibilities sort of collapse. Sounds really reminiscent of what little I understand of quantum mechanics and sort of Schrodinger's cat, that it exists in many states until it's observed, in which case the other, the waveform collapses or whatever. But I think
yeah. So one of my students actually said that last week, that my theory of psak is the yes, and Noah, you'll appreciate that the Migdal guys, obviously, as soon as I mention something like this, they're like, oh yes, it's the Schrodinger's cat of psak with the power of the observer, right? With the power of the observer. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly, it exists. It's Heidegger's uncertainty principle with the observer effect. Yes, that is, if you want to summarize it, that is basically the way Rav Shaul Yisraeli views the Ritva on psak, is that it exists in multiple states until there is an observer. But then it is determined. So yes, I agree with you. And there is, one of my friends wrote his did write his master's thesis at Bar Ilan on how quantum mechanics can help us think about psak, which is fascinating. He gave a 2-part series, a guest lecture on this at Migdal a few years ago, and the guys loved it. They loved it for obvious reasons. Because okay, I saw 2 other hands up, but the screen keeps moving because as people unmute. So whoever it was that raised their hand, just shout out. But I saw 2 hands up. One was Miriam had her hand up. Oh, did she get cut out? Is that what happened? I don't see her on my
I
screen.
was just going to let the other person go first.
Oh, there you are. Got it.
Yeah, so I guess my question was just tell me a little bit more about the magical piece of it. As a good New Englander, magic is something that I don't like. Just to, that's to be transparent. I understand where you're coming from. I think my understanding is that you're saying since we don't know what God wants, that opens up a possibility, like any solid truth kind of thing, end of the day truth. Therefore, yeah.
Okay, well, but before you get right, it's not that we don't know what, right? That's from Moshe Feinstein's thesis, which is we don't know what God says, and that's why there's practical multiple possibilities. The Ritva says it's not that we don't know what God says, we do know what God says, and God says there are multiple possibilities. He's giving it over to us and the process of halacha to create reality, right? Those are 2 separate theses. I'm taking a more radical one. Or at least presenting that as Rav Shaul Yisraeli's interpretation of Ritva. So which of the theses are you picking on? So they're 2 separate ones. I just want to make sure I know which one you're picking on.
I think either one actually works for where I was going to go, but yeah, let's stick with yours. So when you say creating reality, we're not actually creating a reality. There is no, the soup does not change from a soup which had a spoon that was dairy dipped into it to a soup which has never had a dairy spoon dipped into it. It remains the same soup. We're just trying to determine its status on this, under these rules, right?
So okay, right. So we should distinguish reality, right? You're not just determining physical reality. You're determining legal reality, and right, they don't work the same, right? To give a very simple example, right? If you have a car driving at 65 miles an hour on the highway, and I don't know, let's say that the law is that you're in whatever state. And until December 31st at 11:59, the speed limit is 65 miles an hour. But they passed a bill that will go into effect January 1st at midnight that the speed limit will change to 55 miles an hour. So if the car is going at constant speed, the physical reality is not changing. But as that car drives and it turns from December 31st to January 1st, it goes from driving at the speed limit to driving 10 miles over the speed limit and being subject to a speeding ticket, right? So you're right. It won't change whether the spoon fell in to the soup or didn't fall into the soup, but the legal reality could change, right? Just like the car, it was driving at 65 miles an hour. The physical reality hasn't changed, but the legal reality can change even as the physical reality stays constant.
Right.
Right, and yeah, the radical claim of Rav Shaul Yisraeli within the Ritva is that that's what psak is doing. Is that before the halakhic decision was issued, at least in certain decisions, it's in the Schrodinger's cat state of both being forbidden and permitted. And when the posek weighs in, it becomes whatever he says or she says or whoever says. I
understand you. I think that I was actually going in a different direction though. Okay. What I'm trying to say is this. Yes, exactly. So the physical reality has not changed. It's not simply, it's complexly the legal reality that has changed. Okay, fine. So then clearly, not clearly, but I would argue that AI would actually be the best way to go through the journey, so to speak, of reviewing all the halakhic sources and determining, is this car speeding or not? Is this soup kosher or not? And I don't think that we actually disagree on that point either. I think that where we disagree on is the importance of a sentience behind that journey. And that's where I think that your magicalism gets, gets thrown into the mix, because otherwise I'm not sure that we could say one is better than the other. We couldn't weigh them really. And so that's where I want to hear more from you, please.
Okay, so I'm not convinced we agree on the first point, that AI is the best way of doing it. That I'm not convinced of, because well, what does best here mean? Meaning, it's true. It is true that AI can go through multiple possibilities. It can't necessarily go through all possibilities, because at the end of the day, and this is sort of an open question.
Okay, but this isn't what you're actually arguing. You're not arguing about whether AI is best.
I'm not.
Because
I mean, we can leave. That's more of a question amongst techno-optimists versus techno-pessimists, where techno-optimists will say that no, AI is not just able to give you multiple possibilities and give things that seem creative, but it is or one day will be capable of actual creativity, right? And techno-pessimists will say no, as much as it looks like it's creative, it is never doing more than regurgitating things, but it isn't capable of true insight. And that I can have my own personal opinions on it, but I'm no expert. Like, it's not just that I'm not an expert, it's that this is not a settled question within amongst on the tech side. So the first half of what you said is I think an open question, right? Techno-optimists would say AI can do it better, or one day we'll be able to. Techno-pessimists will say maybe not. The second question is, I agree, my bigger point, which is that I don't think that this process, which is in the end of the day more than a technical process, it's more than an algorithm. It is a process that makes real or religious commitments, right? The process of engaging in the Torah, right? And that's why I invoked here the smak, right? That the smak says that making a halakhic decision is not just something we do because we need to know what to do. There's a separate mitzvah in the Torah for the smak to issue halakhic rulings, right? I by the way, should just throw out that anyone who needs to leave, I'm not insulted. We're past the time, but as you know from last week, I'll stay on for as long as you have questions. But again, the smak says it's not just, right? You could have imagined that halakhic decision-making isn't an independent mitzvah, because why should it be a mitzvah? I need to keep Pesach. I need to keep Shabbat. Obviously, if I don't know the answer, so I'll ask an expert. But the smak says, no, the act of engaging in the process and issuing halakhic rulings is a separate mitzvah, which shows you that for him, psak is not just practical. It's not just the way in which I figure out what I'm supposed to do, right? It is itself a religious act, right? It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to make halakhic decisions, if you're capable of doing that. And yeah, I think that requires not just sentience and obligation, right? I think you need to have skin in the game. I don't even think sentience would be enough, right? Like, let's imagine that you are among the people who believe, I don't know if you are or you're not, that AI, in theory, we can reach the holy grail of artificial intelligence, right? Which is general artificial intelligence, maybe even sentience, right? Let's assume that they're right. I'm not convinced that that's actually possible, and many, like I said, this is another open question where you'll pick up 10 books on AI and they'll say this is going to happen in a year, 2 years, 10 years, 50 years, and others which will say it's definitionally impossible. But let's say it could be sentient. Would it be Jewish? Would it be obligated in mitzvot? Right? For me, I think that's important also. Like, maybe it is sentient, but I don't even know if that's enough, right? Sentience is important, but so is obligation. So is religious, theological skin in the game, right? That you are a being obligated in mitzvot, right? I think that's also part of it. the act of making halakhic decisions is itself a religious act, is itself a mitzvah, is itself part of Torah. It's not just the practical way we know what to do. It is an act. It is a religious act. And that's where, and that was why I said this to Rabbi Clapper, that from, he is more on the model that psak is the reason psak is binding is your personal commitment. And I'm very much on this metaphysical camp, which I know sounds a little bit magical. And I said, for me, the big difference in the modern era is AI, is that if you think that psak is binding because you chose to make it binding, then if somebody is like antisocial and would rather sit there with a chatbot all day than ever talk to a human being, then they might very well give over their spiritual life to a good enough, a good enough AI. And they might commit to that. And then you would have to say, well, if someone actually committed to that, would they be bound to follow ChatGPT, right? It's not and maybe the answer would be yes. Whereas I find that to be, that runs against the way I think about Torah. I don't believe it. Like, I just think that you couldn't be bound, no matter how good the chatbot is, no matter how good our version of Rabbi AI is, I don't think you could be bound to a decision made by this thing, no matter how intelligent it is, unless it is a being responsible for Torah in a real way. And yeah, I that is what I'm putting my name behind, and that's why, like I said, it's a somewhat radical thesis. I recognize that, but it also, to me at least, strikes me as true. And if it doesn't strike you as true, that's also fine, right? I understand that I
have to think about it.
Thesis.
I absolutely have to think about it. I'll have to get back to you next week. But I did have one question.
Right,
yeah,
I'll just say that is what I wanted. Part of the reason that I'm giving this series is not for me to get my views out there. It's so that to get my current thinking out there, so that I can, so that other people think about it, but also so I can get feedback. So do not take it and accept it just because I said it at all, right? Think about it and tell me next week or email me, and please, please, please push me on this, right? Again, Evie can attest to this. I'm dead serious about the fact that I want feedback. And yeah, the reason I started this week with this thesis is not just because I think it's strong, but because I presumed I would get feedback, and I want people to think about it so that next week, right? If I did this the last week, I could escape at the end and say, okay, I'm done, right? But now there's another week. So come back next week and tell me I was completely wrong, and that's fine. But think about it.
You can't escape. We have your email address.
You have my email. I'm not running away. I really do want to hear what you have to say, because I'm not convinced that what I said is right. I think it is. I believe in it right now, but I do understand how, I'm like.
Let me just ask you one quick follow-up question.
Sure.
So it feels like a lot to just hang on the smock. So what I'm wondering is, how would you respond to somebody who would say that the smock wasn't even referencing, a metaphysical, experiential kind of situation? The smock was just saying it's a mitzvah because if you don't, then the community is going to go the wrong way. Or a person is going to make, you have a responsibility that if you see that somebody's going to go wrong, you have to fix it, which is a very different, a reading of it, than you have a responsibility to engage in this as a religious, spiritual way to connect to Hashem. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. So
I'm not saying necessarily that I even
100%.
believe that, but I'm just wondering, how would you understand that? How would you respond to that?
Look, I definitely see how people could say that's what the smock is doing. And again, this is not like a closed question. It's not like everyone agrees with the smock or even everyone agrees with that read. Look, there are others, like the Maharal, has a piece, the one I quoted here, but I didn't put in full, who goes as far as to say that, God would rather you get the answer wrong, whatever that means, but put in the effort than happen to get it right without putting the effort, right? He actually thinks that's right. Like, he actually does believe that in certain circumstances there's a truth, and God still wants you to go through the process, and God would rather you get it wrong, but have it gone through the process. you want me to put that Maharal in the chat? Is that what you?
Can you put your email address in the chat?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's on the top of the source sheet.
Oh, okay.
It's on the top of the source sheet, which is in the chat. I
Okay.
could type it out. I'm on my phone, and it'll.
Oh, no
I'll
problem.
do
Justin,
it.
do you have it?
But
Okay.
it's yeah, it's like I'll get it. But yeah, it's but look, I think that you definitely could read the SMOC in a different way. That isn't my only proof for it. I think there are many sources that point in the direction that PSOC is something more than practical. The Maharal is a good one, but he's not the only one. And I think that look, I'm happy if you email me afterwards. I'm happy to send other sources in this direction. But I will acknowledge that there are as many sources as I could bring to claim that halakhic decision making is more. I could bring other sources who will say the opposite. And to put my cards on the table, part of the reason I think, at least for me, that I have an affinity for this type of position is that's how I experience PSOC, right? Both the questions I get and the questions my wife gets, there are halakhic questions coming into my house all the time. My wife would say, "Let's at halakha." We're always, consulting on questions. And at least my experience of it and my experience of leading students through their own halakhic issues and getting them to make decisions for themselves, because I very much want my students to be able to make decisions for themselves. My experience of PSOC is the way I am telling it to you, right? Is as something that isn't just practical. It is a deeply religious experience for me of taking responsibility for a halakhic question, talking it over with the person who's asking, guiding them through the process, in an ideal situation, guiding them through their own thought process. I'm not going to deny that there are people, that there are, authorities that view it differently. But this particular view resonates with me because it's how I experience PSOC. And again, that doesn't make it right. It means that I am inclined to collect the sources that point in that direction, because it's true to how I experience it. So, again, that doesn't make it right, but it does mean that if I'm sharing with you honestly the way I understand the sources and the way I understand my own sort of journey as I do things like this, that resonates. Okay, I see there's 2 more questions. And I know Evie's going to want me to end soon. So the people who've raised their hands, so Noah and Anne or David, whoever raised their hand in that box.
I just want to say thank you
okay.
so much. This was fascinating, and I really appreciate you.
And it was really, thank you everyone for being. Not all the classes I've given on Zoom is there feedback. I'm so happy that this class has had a lot of feedback, because that was why I'm giving this class, is to get your feedback and to push me on these issues. Like I said, I'm not convinced that I'm right about everything I'm saying. I want to put out these ideas to get people thinking, and I want your feedback. I really do. Like, I really, really do. So I'm loving the fact that you guys are staying and talking about it, and I'm looking forward to all the emails you're going to send me and yell at me, which is totally fine. So Anne and Noah.
So
There you go.
So I love this theory. I think it's lovely. I mean, it just like engaging. On this theory, in a sense, it's unrelated to AI.
Yes.
It means a non-Jew kind makes PSOC. So
and I think that might be true. I think that might be true. Might be.
Question is, might be. It's
well,
necessary.
I mean, probably, though. Possibly, I could entertain the possibility that for mitzvot in which non-Jews are obligated, the same phenomenon would be true. But okay. Yeah, I could imagine such a thing.
Except that for many of them, all right. So leaving that question aside, but certainly there are many cases in which that's not true. It seems my question is, and I want David to have that, what is it about AI that raises this theory? It seems like, is AI relevant here because it raises the question for you of a truth, which in a sense is odd because AI, machine learning, doesn't deal in truths. It's probabilistic.
So,
And I want
so
you to
right. So,
say something about
so
that.
what raises, so the reason that AI raises it is because, right. So the reason for me that AI raises this question in particular is because when you, after you've read enough books by techno optimists, they are very convinced that AI will soon be able to make all decisions better than human beings, right? That they, right, predict general artificial intelligence with sentience and with intellect beyond human beings that will be able to have true insight and true creativity. And one of the, I tell my students sometimes that sometimes when I see a new technology and the like, I read a few books, not just like I read a few some books from science fiction that touch on the question, because what I don't know what the future will look like. What I want to imagine, what I like doing in halacha is imagining a worst case or most extreme case scenario. And with most other technologies, you don't see people claiming that one day there will be this thing that will be better at, will be able to do this in ways that human beings can't, that they will be better at being human than we are. But by AI, they do, right? By AI, they are imagining that world. And that raises the question for me, well, what if they were right in theory, right? What would that mean for halacha, right? Would that make what I do less meaningful because I maybe should hand it over to a superhuman, bot, right? That's why it raises it for me. It's not unique to AI, except that the dialogue around artificial intelligence is one that imagines that we might be on the cusp of this. And that's why I want to talk about it. They could be wrong.
That's really clear, really helpful. I want to say one sentence before passing it to Noah, which is I think there's another way of construing AI, not the way you're right, a lot of people take it, which is to see it as a possibility space, in which case it becomes much more congruent with what you've been saying. But
100%, right? No, 100%. And if, right, so maybe I'll put it differently. If the somewhat more pessimistic view or less ambitious view amongst the sort of tech predictions of the world are right, then this becomes less relevant, because then it will stay as a really effective tool. But right, what I'm doing today really, and maybe I should have said this at the beginning, is the thought experiment of what if they're right? What if they are right? What does that mean for my religious life? What does that mean for this thing we call halacha? If they're wrong, and AI will never be capable of true insight, then there's a much easier answer here, right? But if it one day will be capable of true insight, is there still something human, right, about psak? And that's really the question. If I wanted to sharpen it, and you're helping me sharpen it, that I'm really asking, that's bothering me after reading book after book. And I have read so many, I don't even know at this point, right? It's like part of it is like when I start thinking about technology, I just read. I've read hundreds of books on this, and it's like, right, the number of times I've read a book where they predict that's what it's going to be, it just gets scarier every time you hear it. That's why, like, you read Toby Ord's book. I forget what it's called, but he has a book on all the possible ends of the world that current technologies could lead us to, and one of them is, right, the end of the world brought about by AI, right? Like, AI scares people in a way that other technologies don't, because we don't know how powerful it's going to be, right? And that's really, that's sort of what's driving me. But thank you for helping me sharpen it, because you're right. That's why AI raises the question for me in a way that other things don't. It's because of the text. Maybe tech. In this case, it's not techno optimists or pessimists. It's the techno maximalists, right? It's the techno maximalists versus the techno minimalists, right? I'm trying to imagine, if the techno maximalists are right, what does that mean for halacha? Yes, thank you, Noah. That's right. The name of the book is Existential Risk and the Future of Humanity.
You set it up in a way that even if AI operates in a similar way, a truth way, in knowing way to halacha, there's still an advantage to being a human being committed to something.
Yep, that's what I and that's exactly what I believe, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that philosophers are struggling with, right? The I might have mentioned this last week, but one of the things I think I did mention last week, the Melanie Challenger notes, very fascinatingly, is that it's specifically the things that we used to think that were the most human, right? Like our rationality and the like, that are the easiest to mimic by AI. And therefore, it really challenges to think about what does it mean to be human, right? That's what, right? And I mentioned this last week. That's why she wrote her book, to be what it means to be animal or something like that, right? That maybe we have to stop thinking. But like, if you're Aristotle, you're the Rambam, all the things that you used to think were human, those were the first things to go. Because those are rule-based, right? Those were logical rules. AI can do that very easily. It was like intuition and emotions and all the things that the Rambam was like, oh, I don't like those things. Those are the things that are very hard to mimic. And that's really scary, right? Because it really challenges you to say, what does it mean to be a human being? Okay, it's already half an hour over, so Noah, you get the last question, but Evie is going to, I feel like you're going to kill me because I'm over time. But Noah, go.
It's good.
I'm keeping you too long.
Is
Noah,
go ahead.
what's your question?
Just very short. I always understood the phrase Shivim Shavim Shel Torah, that there's 70 words or expressions of Torah as the different as different ways of interpretation, but now you're actually giving me a source that says, oh, there's 49 this way and 49 this way. So then how should I understand the 70 expressions then? Or 70 yeah.
So I mean, I'll tell you very quickly that, one way of reading that is there actually are different perspectives. But I would add Rabbi Lamb's quip on it, which is there are 70, but that doesn't mean there are 71, right? Meaning just because there isn't one right answer doesn't mean there aren't things that are don't fit the rules that they're not wrong, right? Like that's important to remember. Like if someone tells you that, you're supposed to eat matzah on Rosh Hashanah and sleep in the sukkah on Shavuot, that's just wrong, right? That's not like, that's not in the realm of possibility, right? So there are multiple truths, but there's also, right, there is a limit, right? There is a framework. It's not a free for all. There's still rules, and there are still sources that you have to engage in, and there's still a limit to what can be said. Even if there isn't one thing that we can say, there is a limit. Okay, or if you want the more cynical version, which other people quote Rabbi Lam as saying, not Rabbi Lam saying, but rephrase it, which is just because I'm not right, it doesn't mean that you're not wrong, right? But okay.
Yeah,
okay, I think we'll.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think we'll call it. We'll call it for today. Should we call it for today? I think that's right. Thank you, really, for this whole series, for being really, really engaged. It is great. It really means that I get to think about these more, and we'll finish next week, and then we're going to go straight into 3 days of in the winter session, if you want, on the impact on work, which should be a lot of fun. The first day will also be a conversation with me and someone who's actually in the tech world. So that'll be fun, sort of talking about it more practically. So I'm looking forward to that also, and I invite all of you to join.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ziring, and thank you everyone for joining us again today and for speaking so much. That was great. Just a couple of reminders that our winter week offerings are open. I think I mentioned last week, but I just want to mention again that we have morning and afternoon sessions between December 22nd through the 24th, and a Boker Yun on December 25th, also with Rabbi Ziring, who will be teaching the 3-part class from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And signups are as usual at drisha.org/classes. And again, thank you so much, and we'll see each other again soon. Lehitraot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.